This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the August 18th Board of Finance meeting. Good to see you all again. First item on our agenda, minutes from our May 19th meeting. Everyone's had a chance to look at it. Any questions or comments? Have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
Make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? New business. Before we wrap up our June, Mr. Peter had a slide he wanted to share with us.
Okay, thank you. So Ed and I were spending a lot of time on trying to close out this year-end budget. And I wanted to take a snapshot, this one slide, please direct your attention to the screens, of some of the information that's in these reports. So this is a one-slide overview of one of the many things we're working on in terms of the financial management of this government. So if you take a look at that, and this slide here from Board of Finance. So when we look at our revenue shortfalls this year, our tax revenue came in $608,000 less than what was projected. And most of that is because we had a delay in tax revenue in terms of during COVID helping people during difficult times. So the time frames of paying taxes were elongated and extended during the COVID period. But when we look at July's revenue, which is not on this slide, we've already picked up $200,000, I'm sorry, August revenue. When we look at the July and August revenue, we've already picked up $200,000 of those back taxes, interest, and arrears. So we fully anticipate, Ed and I, that we're going to pick up that $608,000 this fiscal year, which is unbudgeted revenue. And $200,000 has already come in. Now, the town revenue category in general came in $461,000 less. Some of that, if you look at the line items, you'll see that the pilot payment, of course, I believe there's $200,000 there. The big issue that we were faced with is interest income on investments, with the rates being so low. So when we add up all those line items in that category, we're going to see a shortfall of about $461. Now the ECS line, we had actually got more. We actually have $179,000, almost $180,000 in more money than what we budgeted for. When we look at the category in town revenue by departments, we see about a $300,000 shortfall. Most of that is in building permit fees. As I've stated time and time again, last year we lost 37 economic development projects due to COVID. And that was reflected in these building permit fee losses in terms of revenue versus projected revenue and budgeted revenue. The good news is I'm on a mission, and I've got about 50 economic development projects that I'm going to be bringing forward here. And already our building permit fees are averaging a lot higher than they were this time a year ago on a weekly basis. So when we look at the pure revenue loss, it's about $1,190,000. Our departments came in under budget in terms of expenditures at $753. So when we look at the budget right now, and we haven't closed the books, it's unbalanced at $437,000. Now there's $3,500,000 in ARPA money that's sitting aside. And we know that with over 50,000 municipalities across the country, each one of these municipalities has gotten this federal stimulus. One of the first guidances on this ARPA money, which is federal stimulus, is to apply it against lost revenue due to COVID. So Ed and I are working with the auditors to determine what is the actual number we should apply the ARPA money that we have to. Is it the pure revenue loss? Is it right now the projected unbalanced budget, which shows a 437 deficit? So that's what we are working on it. Even the auditors don't know yet. Apparently, the auditors across Connecticut are going to classes in terms of trying to address this issue and answer this question. So right now, when we look at this budget, that's where we're at. The good news is we're going to pick up the tax revenue, as I referenced earlier. The good news is that this fiscal year, we anticipate a significant amount of money reimbursed from FEMA, which is non-budgeted revenue, from expenses that are in this past year's budget that are part of what you see here. And then the good news is that the ARPA money, there's another huge, the word they use is tranche. The federal government uses the word tranche. There's another significant amount of money coming in at the end of this fiscal year to address lost revenue, water, sewer, broadband infrastructure improvements. So Ed and I have to work with the federal government to fill out reports later this year to present where we're spending the federal stimulus money. So every city and town is going through this right now. The numbers, of course, vary between the cities and towns, but that's where we're at right now. Thank you.
Mike, I have a quick
Yeah.
question for you. Again, I'm sure we'll get into this as we discuss the end-of-year reports, but based upon the revenue and expenditure end-of-year reports, I see a revenue shortfall of 2.9 million, and we're under-expended by 753,000. So I see that as a net $2.2 million shortfall.
You have to back out the $1.8 million on what was once called MRSA. Ed?
Yeah, we separated MRSA, took that out of the equation there, and just parked that in the MRSA fund, and
So-
charged the expenditures over there.
So MRSA is in here. It's listed as grants for municipal projects is 1.8
The
million.
budgeted amount is, the actual amount is moved to the separate fund.
But this is what you do every year. Every year you list that
Correct.
as zero and then a negative number as the amount that we've spent, which was 1.3 million,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So that is built into this revenue amount, if I'm understanding this correctly. So again, if we look at the second, or the last pages, it's 2.9 shortfall and a 753 under expended for a difference of.
Right, but overall, I think we're looking at keeping, MRSA is part of this equation. We have the money that we took in, $1.8 million minus the expenditures, so we have that money over there in a separate fund. Really, going forward, that's all gonna be combined with the general fund.
But every year, you've always commingled those
separate.
funds, right?
Right.
You've always reported it on the special funds.
Correct.
But you've always reported it in our revenue as negative amounts, correct?
Right.
And in this total, that is exactly what you've done. You have a total of a negative 1.3 million, correct?
Right.
Okay, so my question still stands.
So we're showing a 437 unbalanced budget. You know, this whole situation with what was once called MRSA continues to create a lot of confusion here. Now, in this fiscal year, we're changing it. We're just rolling it all into one. So
You are?
we're
Yeah, because they've changed the way to handle it beginning for this, in this current fiscal year,
Current.
2022. So it's gonna stay in the general fund. There won't be another MRSA fund or any additional funds going towards it, and it's all gonna be used through the general fund.
That's news to me.
so it's no longer MRSA. It's municipal grant and aid.
So they have been
Yeah, they
getting,
changed
they
it.
have been
Changed
getting
it.
my emails. They've been receiving them, yes.
So
Yeah.
Look, if-
I was gonna get into the MRSA discussion, obviously, when we talk over the end of year reports here.
So when we look at the MRSA line, okay, that when we take the expenses out of this past fiscal year's budget that we applied to the money that was available in MRSA, we're showing a surplus. I'm using MRSA because that's the way it was designated. It's going to change this fiscal year, as I've said many times here. The MRSA account shows a surplus of about 505,000 because there was more money available in MRSA than there were expenses.
Is that the result of the waivers that you received?
That's everything.
No,
Okay,
That's waivers and that's expenses.
okay.
Ed?
the waivers are for the use of the funds, the expenses.
Right,
The 1.8 is the
So it's
income.
the save, that's the savings.
That's the
forecast.
income that we got.
I see what you're saying.
I think
So,
that.
yes, we had a carryover on MRSA from the previous fiscal year. We had
Right.
$1,008,000 in,
Right.
$1,860,000 in. So the
Right.
net balance, correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, of surplus on MRSA, after all expenses, is 505.
For this
Right.
fiscal year.
Right, but that is the revenue for this year minus the Public Works Department expenses. The other money for the vehicles were for prior years for the money that's in the account already. So we have a balance in the MRSA account from prior years.
Well, that's
And
what I'm
that's been
saying.
charged against that.
That's what I'm saying. When we look at what the balance was plus what we got and subtract the waivers and the public works expenses, we're showing about a 505 surplus.
For this year, yeah,
For this
plus
year.
other money in there.
Right. So,
But the Public Works just was able to acquire the vehicles, even though we were approved for them months ago.
When you say this year, do you mean the current fiscal year, or we're talking about the one we're trying to close out?
The one we're closing out.
when we're
Okay,
closing out.
all right, thank
When
you.
we're closing out.
So, but the main thing that's missing is the ARPA money, is not included in this revenue statement, the
Correct.
1.17 million.
Yes.
No,
Correct?
3,504,000. That's the ARPA money.
3 million.
3.5 million.
I see. It's
That's
not included.
It's not in there. So the bottom line is, we're gonna be in really good shape here. Even if we look at folding the two fiscal years together with the monies that we have coming in on municipal grant and aid, we're gonna be getting another 3.5 million next June on ARPA money. So we just gotta figure out what this number ends up to be in terms of this unbalanced budget for this fiscal year that will be balanced by ARPA money.
So I guess the question is, why is it not here? I mean, you can figure out what it applies to within the budget, but in
Because
terms of.
we have to keep it in a separate account, Ed.
Uh-huh.
That was Joe Senafani's recommendation. He says that, and so we go through, he went to class Monday and Tuesday, and this whole federal mandate was finalized, I guess, this past week or just the week before. So he's gonna tell us in the next couple of days or next week how to handle it, but he said for now, just park it in a separate fund, and then we'll move it accordingly. I mean, we've been lucky every year to close out things immediately in July, to have everything done at the August Board of Finance meeting. But typically, towns don't close out everything till later in the year. And that's the category we're gonna fall into this year, because I can't finish the revenue until he gives me his recommendation, final guidance. So once I get that, then we'll move what has to go into the general fund and add it to this report.
Okay.
The long and
But I don't
short,
have it at this point.
At the very least, it'll be a zero budget.
Right.
It also could be a $700,000 surplus, depending on what we can charge off.
So,
Till the auditors give Ed guidance, we don't know. Maybe, we should know actually by next meeting.
you know, we've
We'll know by
gotten,
next meeting, Nancy.
the money we've gotten pales in comparison to what some of my colleagues have gotten, $40, $50 million. So, so I look at it and say that philosophically, we have been so well-run here financially, as the rating agencies have rated us, and as the auditors have pointed out. I don't mind taking the money, because every other city and town in Connecticut is accepting the money, including sometimes 10 to 15 times what we're getting.
Why is that?
What do you mean?
Why are we not getting 10 to 15? Why aren't we up there?
Because we're so well-run
So
financially.
we're punished.
Well, you know, the way the federal government classifies it is there's distressed municipalities and non-distressed municipalities. We're non-distressed. The distressed municipalities get more on the ARPA money and more on the county distribution. So I've got colleagues of mine who've gotten anywhere from $15 to $60 million on this
I thought the county distributions were based on per capita.
capital, but
Yeah.
still,
No, but you're right, that the federal government has designated, I think, based on residents with certain income levels, targeted, distressed, larger.
That's right.
Urban, mostly, municipalities.
right.
And of course, we're not one of those. So it's not, this is not related to how well we run our town, it's just the makeup of our town.
But the initial distribution is part of how we're run, even with the state revenue we get. The distressed municipalities get more than us. I should point out in these numbers, what gets lost in the shuffle here is that this past year with tornadoes, storms, COVID-related expenses, most of which were unbudgeted expenses, with a department that had COVID infections where overtime had to be spent to cover the shifts, a tornado that cost us $750,000 in unbudgeted expenses because I committed to the citizens that we were going to help them pick up the tornado debris. All of these were non-budgeted expenses. And we're still only closing this out with a deficit of 437 that's going to be balanced by the ARPA money that's in place to balance a budget for lost revenue due to COVID. Now I appreciate the questions. I'll tell you why. Because I know that we know more about this because we deal with it every day. So that's why I'm very appreciative of the questions to try to explain this. We have become experts in this, and yet there's still a nebulous, arcane aspect to this to respect to what is the number that we can apply ARPA to. The auditors don't even know yet. But there's enough money in there to apply it to whatever the number is. And then from there, we work on water, sewer, broadband infrastructure improvements with the balance of it that Ed and I are obligated to present to the federal government.
Thank you, Michael.
Sir, can I ask a couple questions based on the opening statement?
Okay.
The auditor that we're using is our CAFR auditor, the end of year auditor for our accounting, for our books. And is he the only advice that we're getting? What about CCM? What about direct federal government language?
Yeah, we're
I mean, is Ed interpreting all this stuff, or should we hire or pay Mr. Centofanti for his service as a consultant? Because certainly it is not included in his regular end of year duties.
So here's the way it works, Michael. It's a good question. So our executive board of CCM, myself included, we're constantly going through the federal guidance because it's fluid, it changes, there's subtleties to it almost every week. On top of that, I'm in close contact with our 3rd Congressional District Office, who does a lot of research for us. With the cost organization that I'm on the executive board, we're also reviewing the guidance. But in the end, what we get, we do run it by Joe Centofanti because we have to ensure that our auditor is involved with giving us advice on how to close the books this year. So we're getting information from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, I mean, in case that there is some misapplication here, we obviously need to have it documented as to how we arrived at these decisions. That's right. So that we're not penalized.
Exactly. So that's why Ed hit the nail on the head earlier. This is going to be a longer period to close these books because of the complexities of what's going on across the country with all the municipalities. So we're not going to be able to close the books as quickly as we once did. But when we close the books, this will be a balanced budget.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think anyone should have a doubt that the budget at least will be balanced, if not have significant surplus. I mean, it's $3.5 million.
All right. Well, the rest of my questions regarding this will occur as we go through the reports.
Let's get through the expenditures reports for June. Questions on them?
Well, June.
How are you doing this? Are you doing June,
Oh,
July? Yeah.
Well, no, we'll do June first because we'll close up the
Okay.
year. July, there's really nothing in July. But we'll do June first. And in reality, some of the things I picked up in June, which obviously is our end of the year, kind of know the answer to, but one of the larger items was fire had a $314,000 deficit in replacement staffing, page 10. And I assume that's when they had COVID and they had entire shifts out and they were replacing them on overtime. Was probably a big part of that. That's what I remember.
I would imagine, but Can't say definitely.
Um,
See, it probably is because the charge for the month looks like a normal amount. So I would say it probably is.
So yeah, that was 3 change, and even on page 12, transportation hauling, which I assume is mostly related to storm, was 179,000 over budget. I mean, those 2 line items alone exceed what the unbalanced amount is in this expense side. And there's even more.
And tipping fees,
And
if you look at that
tipping
line
fees,
item.
Yeah, that's
So, we talked about that for a year now, how tipping fees have risen, and they ended up becoming unbudgeted incremental expenses.
Tipping fees on page 10, which was over 300,000 over budget.
What are we doing about that? Is there any resolution?
Well, we did budget more in this current year, I believe, and
So, this is a whole statewide issue, and with Mira closing in Hartford, and that is gonna reduce the repositories for trash, that means the rate's gonna go up. As chairman of our board in the South Central region with the Covanta board, we see tipping fees anywhere like $92, $93, $94, $95 a ton. And that is in comparison to what was once $67 a ton.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really glad that you brought the point up about the fire department, because I think I had said quite some time ago that contractual replacement staffing, due to both promotions as well as the additional firefighters, would exceed $1 million very soon. And sure enough, here we are at the end of the fiscal year, and we're in excess of $1 million. So the fire department budget overall was 3% over, whereas the police department, I have to congratulate Chief Glenn, because he came in under budget, and he's stepping into big shoes trying to fill former Chief McLaughlin's position, but they came in 4% under budget, so I have to compliment them on that.
so you're thinking fire is $1 million over budget?
No, I'm saying that the contractual replacement staffing line, I said, would exceed $1 million as a result of both promotions and the additional firefighters that have been added
But I don't
sequentially
believe
each year.
that was what the cause was. There was an entire shift that was taken out for COVID, which means an 11-man shift was replaced for several days, several weeks as overtime.
Well, then we should,
That's a big number.
we should see that in whatever month there should be one spike, but my guess is that it's actually just increased steadily as a result of the addition of personnel, as well as the promotions, because again, whoever replaces someone at a given position is compensated at that position. So if, someone of a lower rank replaces a lieutenant or a captain, then they actually are compensated at that level. So I
But
think-
Nancy, I don't think you're gonna see it all in 1 month.
No, what he's describing is what you'll see, a spike in 1 month as a result of a COVID replacement. What I'm suggesting is you will just see a steady increase, if not an exponential increase, just as a result of having more people with more time off and more contractual replacements. It's just that simple.
But
Anyone else have any
Yeah, I have a
expenditures?
comment on fire. So we talk about this, I think Nancy does too, the
Mhm.
building maintenance and repair.
Yep.
So we're over. Now, I know I'm gonna go to July, but in July, I already see that there's an encumbrance there. So like, what are we doing with building maintenance and repair? Because this is ongoing this year, and it's already starting that there's an encumbrance next year.
It's a great point.
So what is the building repair? I mean, how many repairs, is there a big project?
I don't know if it's necessarily all repairs, or there's extra maintenance because of probably extra cleanings during COVID during the year, and then supplies maybe, and certain other things that are more supplies than repairs, but it's all put in that one category. And I think I provided a printout of that a couple months ago, of that line, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, okay, I'll have to go back and look at that. And then the same thing, I'm looking at consultants on this, on page 4, the software. So like, we only expended half of it, and then if you go to July, you see the rest of it. So does that mean that, like, are we paying this twice a year? Did the payment plan, because
What page is that?
page 4,
Yeah.
the permitting software, there's only half, we expended half year to date, and then if you go to the, and not to digress, but you go to July, you see the other half, or something close to that, so I just wondered if.
Yeah, well, we had a issue with the software going from one vendor, so we had a problem to another one.
So we switched
So-
vendors,
Yeah,
okay,
and then we had to settle out, we paid part of it, and I wasn't gonna pay them until they did what they needed to do before we transferred over to the new company. So that's why I ended up waiting till the next fiscal year.
okay.
I mean, I had to get them to do the work I needed.
All right, well, yeah, I was like, why are we changing our payment? Something was up there, and that
Yeah.
just stuck out to me when I went to go through it.
If I can just interject here.
Sure.
Direct your attention to that corner over there. These are the things happening in our buildings. And we had a new roof we had to replace over here. We had to replace windows for the safety of our employees over at the annex. We had to allow access, God forbid if there was a fire over there, the windows didn't open. These windows don't open. These windows are hazard traps. So when we have leaks here, leaks there, leaks in the buildings, we had, last fiscal year, we had a library boiler out. This is no different, ladies and gentlemen, than to when we run our own homes, okay? There's things we have to do, infrastructure improvements that sometimes we had no idea this was gonna have to do this. So this is gonna appear now as an expense somewhere in this fiscal year. I can't have a meeting with business executives in my office and the roof's leaking in there, where the conference room table is water coming through the ceiling. So these are the things we're faced with here.
With respect to the library boiler, has that been
Yeah,
addressed?
that's
Okay,
been
so it's been
addressed.
replaced?
Yeah, that's
And
replaced.
so this expenditure for building maintenance and repair, that's 237%, we shouldn't see that continue?
No.
Okay, let's hope.
Let's hope.
Anything else on revenue, or rather expenditures?
So we're doing expenditures in.
Expenditures first, in June.
Right, okay. And I thought maybe we would consider the May reports at the same time, because those were received separately since our last meeting. Are
I
we-
did not include May on the agenda, I went right to June. If you have something,
No, I just didn't know if we're supposed to
No, I was just gonna do June. Yeah,
approve reports.
it's a
on-
moot point because we're beyond the,
Yeah,
and it picks up in the June report anyway.
okay.
Anything else on expenditures? Revenue?
Yes, the answer is yes. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to be
What's your
polite here in
question?
case Tim wants to speak up.
Go right ahead, Mike.
Save your voice. Now, just to get a better understanding, a handle on how the MRSA was accounted for in the previous year. The MRSA was deducted is deducted from the loss that's showing on our sheet here of income of 2.9 million. So that's how we ended up at the 1.19 million on the screen right here. On the expense side, let's just take, for instance, one of the accounts you use here. I think it's in central facilities on page 13. The winter maintenance and supplies. Now it's showing 140 is the budgeted amount, 140,000, and what is expended there is 204,000. And what shows up on our MRSA report here is an application of MRSA funds for that account of 205,000. So that's approximately the same amount. So could you just tell me how you handled the MRSA funds there and just explain the application? Because during the year, as the year progressed, you did reduce the amount of that line, and then year-to-date expended ended up being a certain sum, right?
It's zero.
So it's back.
Right,
Yeah.
over the years, I've tried to keep all the expenditures here, because when this MRSA ends, you want to be able to compare budget to budget, that's why my rationale was for that over the years. So all the expenditures go in the accounts for public works in the various departments. And I have my staff break out what would apply to MRSA, and then at the end of the year, move it from this line to the MRSA fund to offset the revenue that's received.
Okay.
So that's why you see a zero there, because everything for winter maintenance is completely applicable to MRSA.
Right.
So
So then,
what in goes out.
okay, so then in the right column, the total is 137,000, showing as as available in the budget.
Yes.
Correct.
So when all these get totaled at the very end, the 753, which is up there for all departments under budget, does that require an adjustment for MRSA?
No.
For the funds that MRSA?
The 753 already includes the MRSA money coming out. What's been taken out of the expenditures? The encumbrances haven't, because the staff don't go through all that. They give me the actual expenditures. That's why there's a little balance left on that line.
But of that 140,000, that's all been paid for, plus an extra 65,000 was paid for in that line when we used 205,000. And yet, it's just showing available in the budget still on that very line, 137,000.
There was 204,000 in that line as of June 30th, and then I adjusted out the 204,
Right,
right? That went to MRSA,
yeah,
okay?
okay. I will look at this again over the next month and have more specific questions. But
Because this will be the last time we're gonna
Yeah.
see this.
you know how much it's bothered me for years.
I know.
MRSA no longer exists after this ending fiscal year.
God bless us.
But Ed, to put it sort of simply, these reductions that Mike is talking about, and there's others in here, right?
Yes.
They all reflect the application of MRSA money at the end of the year, right? There's a
And they'll
couple,
match what's on the
Right.
page after 14.
there's a couple on the prior page, I noticed, there's some on this page, I think there's some, I think even on the, well, not the next page, or mostly these two pages. But those negative numbers in the month to date, that is the MRSA expenses
It's the month of June
application.
expenditures less the MRSA transfer.
Right, okay,
And you'll see which accounts to hit on the 8.5 by 14 sheet,
Right.
because they have all the account numbers.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Okay. I'm just saying, in most accounting situations, for the public, we want to get this as easy to understand for people like the public as possible, and this whole system was contrary to that. But it's ended. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on expenditures? Your revenue?
One last question on expenditures, just on the bond page, on the last page, 18. The interest versus the principal, is there any correspondence between those two? We have one line where, I don't know if we made an extra payment of,
No, what happened was, when we did the refunding, we ended up paying, I think, a little more principal, and it threw everything off, but we had to settle it because we were trying to get the savings from the bond refunding. So that's why it's probably together, we're a little bit over budget. But we had to do that in order to close the deal. Excuse me.
okay, that's an important thing you might.
Well, I
We
think,
talked about that in May, though.
talked about it in May, I think, by us renegotiating the bonds, we saved $2,125,000.
Right, it's just when you're looking at
Yes,
the overall year end.
Right.
I mean, we could have ended up in the
Yeah,
black
exactly, right.
if
But
we didn't do that.
for the public, though, it's 700,000+ a year we saved in debt service by us staying on top of the bond issue here. So, over 3 years, so $2,125,000 is the number, I think it was, that we
Revenue?
saved.
Well, I can see that the disabled elderly are not thought of highly, because that 211,000, of course, is a program that's been discontinued.
Yes, it has, yes.
Yes.
So that's good. Anything else on revenue?
A quick question for Ed. Under cash surplus, where we have the special revenue fund transfer of 200,000.
Correct.
Just roughly, what did that come from? I know it comes from the special
Reach out,
funds. Okay, exclusively. Okay.
This was pretty good one, Dave.
So I have a question regarding the current tax shortfall that's listed here. Yeah, $1.1 million. Was any of that due at all to any math errors or any assessment issues, or any court adjustments? Because can we consider most of this as possibly to be collected in back taxes?
So, on the, we'll refer to the screen there again, Michael, for a second. The 608,799, we can presume with great certainty that we'll recoup that, and more than that because of the interest. We're not going to recoup building permit fees.
Well, yeah, I mean, that 608 is a summary of 4 lines here, or 5 lines. And I was just speaking in terms of the current taxes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which, I guess if you're only 2% short, you're down $1.1 million. But again, that's not something that is lost forever, possibly.
No, that's what we were saying earlier, most of that funds, we will collect in this fiscal year with interest.
We've already collected almost 200 of it, right?
Yeah, we collected, as I said earlier, 200 of that. So that'll come in as incremental revenue versus budget, because it's non-budgeted revenue.
I think that's also a reflection of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that people are still financially hurting.
I agree with
And
you.
those people that took advantage of the extended grace periods apparently still need an extension even beyond that. So,
I think you're exactly right about that, yes, I do.
it's really unfortunate. So while I agree with you that we may collect some of this money with interest, it really comes at a tremendous personal cost. And so I do feel for people that are in that situation.
There's nothing else in revenue special funds?
On the revenue, the 304,000 is the shortfall in building fees. So is that possibly going to be used in our calculation of income loss?
Yes.
With regard to ARPA?
Yes.
Okay. The fire fee loss of $205,000, that can't be recovered with ARPA.
Well, it's,
Wait a minute.
Well, it's not a loss,
Wait,
it's just uncollected, or over budgeted in terms
What?
of.
No.
No, what-
That might be collected as well.
right, yeah,
That might be able to be collected as well.
Really?
right.
Well, it's tight, if you're talking about ties to building permits,
Is that the plan review fees?
the
Yeah.
project did not move
Gotta be able to
forward,
collect
so
that.
it's lost revenue.
Yes, but not the paramedic fees. I don't think that's going to
Yeah,
occur.
that paramedic.
Right. So, Michael,
It's just interesting if ARPA will,
That's why the auditor.
if any auditor is gonna look and just say, did we forecast wrong, or is it, or maybe you could document more losses than that. Maybe that line should have come well over.
well, we're actually
Budget.
trying to determine that. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. So that's why I want to go back to what Ed said earlier, and he was so correct on this. It's going to take a while to close this fiscal year out.
Okay, yes, I'm finished with the.
Special funds.
Oh, you're going there. I like our new expanded special funds sheet here. And this leads over to Board of Ed.
Yes.
Nancy, you may.
We all have questions about
Make
that.
questions.
So when last we met, back in May, as you all recall, in the 2-page report from the Board of Ed Finance Director, he was predicting with all expenditures and encumbrances built in, a surplus of $2.6 million. Now, that's not what was reflected in the little memo that was on the front, but that's what the actual printout said. And then if you go to that exact same printout for the May reports, as of the end of May, it was predicting a surplus of $657,500. Again, this is the Munis report. I'm sorry, that he was predicting in the memo $657,000, but the Munis report showed a surplus of $1.6 million. So somehow we went from 2.6 to 1.6 million in a month. And then we get to this end of year, so just a month later, and somehow we're left with $7,000. So I have some questions about that, including how we actually define the Board of Ed surplus. Because on the town side, we calculate a surplus, and then after it's calculated and reported, then it's transferred into our general fund. And it seems as though the Board of Ed is allowed to transfer the funds and then declare the surplus. And that doesn't seem quite right, because they transferred $1 million into I believe it was a special ed fund. And so in addition to almost a $500,000 expense from this BOE carryover special fund. And so that's why I'm bringing it up now. So for my first question, Ed, is since you are responsible for authorizing any expenditures from this particular special fund, what did they spend $500,000 on in 1 month?
Nancy, you talking about last fiscal year or this fiscal year?
Sorry, I'm looking at the June 30th,
Okay.
2021
Right.
special funds and accounting page. If you look at BOE carryover,
Right.
it started off with a balance of $557,000, and it's left with an ending fund balance of blank.
Right. I know what he's doing. He's trying to portray the surplus at May or whenever it was, except after that, like this item here, he transferred that money, which he can, to the medical self-insurance fund. They needed funds, it made sense, I said, no problem with it. And I think the same thing happened with some of the other transfers he made at the end of the year. They went into the medical surplus account from the budget as well. So,
Yeah, I think
So-
because of the COVID, they were allowed last year to just carry over.
1 year they were, yeah,
Carry
last year
over
they were
revenue, carry over into
balance.
this,
Correct.
yeah, in this past fiscal
Right.
year, yes.
And if you put them in a reserve fund, I had no problem with that. It just moved them from one account to another. So it's better, I'd rather see it in the medical account, because eventually they're gonna need money there.
So
Well,
it's
no,
three.
no, these are two different things.
Yeah.
One is we close out the year, and whatever surplus the Board of Ed has, as of a year ago, we all agreed, yes, they can keep the money based upon a state statute, and they can keep it as long as it's less than 2% of their total budget. And they can roll it into this BOE carryover fund. Okay, we agreed on that. What I'm saying is somehow, I believe the purpose of that particular statute was twofold. One was to try to reduce expenditures and reduce the burden on the taxpayers. Now, that presumes that whatever money is spent is money that would have been spent on things that would are included in the budget. If it's not, then it's in addition to. Secondly, the other purpose was to try to reduce a year-end runoff in which the Board of Ed funds were spent. And it seems to me that's exactly what has happened. In the month of June, $500,000 was spent. So this is what I'm asking you. This is not just the $1 million. I'm saying that there should have been $2.6 million.
But when you're saying spent, I can't tell you what he spent outside of town. If he transferred it to a fund, it could help you with that part. Because I know he transferred it to some of the medical reserve funds.
Yeah, they're able to change all their line
Which they can
items.
do.
So a year
All the
ago,
line
Ed,
items.
when I asked you very specifically, who's gonna have control over this particular fund, you said this is exclusively under your jurisdiction and your control. So any money that's moved, whether it's moved or spent.
From the carryover fund.
From the carryover
Right.
fund, has to be subject to your approval,
Right, and
right?
he wanted to move it to the self-insurance fund, I had no problem with that.
Be-
Support
So that was the $1
73.
million. Are we sure that
No,
this
no, it's
forces?
$473,000.
Okay, in his.
From this is from the carryover fund. That's not his budget. The carryover fund is a separate fund.
Yes, I understand
Yeah.
that, I understand that, but they were saying, in addition to this is the balance, that was already in there. In addition to that, there was also a surplus at the end of the year
Right.
of $2.6 million, of which $1 million he transferred into this self-insurance fund. So those are two separate things. What I'm asking is, what did they spend this money on, this $473,632? And secondly, is this other fund something that we all approved, that the Board of Ed can simply transfer their surplus into?
No, there's no more money going into the Board of Ed carryover, because that was only last year. They didn't have that this year.
They didn't have
They're
it
not
because, they didn't have
transferring
any surplus because they transferred it all.
No, they're not gonna be putting any money into this fund, is what I'm saying. This fund, go through the line, it started at 557.
Yep.
They transferred 473 to the medical self-insurance fund.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think
Oh,
so.
I'm sorry.
No, I think they spent that money, and then in addition to that, at the end of the year, as I mentioned, they had somewhere between 1.6 and 2.6 million dollars in surplus, of which they transferred 1 million into this other fund.
That 473, if I'm not mistaken, went into the medical insurance fund.
Nancy, where did you get the 1.6 and 2.6 from?
So if you go back to the, actually, Tim, thank you for pointing out, because you pointed it out at the May meeting. If you look at that two-page munis report from the Board of Ed, then, from Howard, then you'll see on the very last line, the fully encumbered surplus was 2.6 million. And then if you look at it for June, I'm sorry, for the May report, so that was at the end of April, the end of May, it was 1.6 million. And now if you look at it for the month of June, it's much less. So each time, in both April and in May, they were predicting substantial, they were referring to it as healthy surpluses. And now it appears as though we are left with $7,000.
Not to steal Diane's
The
thunder,
munis report
but
for the end of June says $7,000.
Right, the reports.
we got 3 of them here.
Yes, no, these reports from the Board of Ed, you can't understand them, they're not labeled, there's not title, column headers. When you go to the next page, you don't know what you're looking at.
Sorry.
I can't tell what these 3 are.
North Haven Board of Education Live DB Year-to-Date Budget Report, and it's a two-page.
I have 3 of them.
Is it the standard one like that in this font?
Yeah, the really tiny font, exactly.
They're all tiny.
Yes, exactly. So it's $7,000. So there is some very creative accounting going on here, and it appears as though the Board of Ed is allowed to do this without any authorization, certainly from this board. And so I'm just wondering how we got to this place where.
So Nancy, I'm sorry to interrupt, what's the date of the report you're looking at? Because again, I have 3 of them here.
Yeah.
In the upper left, I see a date.
Let's see, 8/4.
Thank you.
Well, Tim, both dates have the exact same information.
Just look at Di, your sister.
Yeah, it's the top one.
So Nancy, I'm trying to understand your question. So let me start with a statement and fill me in as to what your question is. So first of all, for the public watching, Board of Ed has the statutory authority to move the funds around and do what they think is best. All this board, all I do is we give them, and all you do as voters in a referendum, you give them an aggregate amount. We approve an aggregate amount. But putting that aside, $1 million they had that they allocated to 3 special areas. SPED, special ed, capital, and the insurance fund. And they came to us with that. Ed and I agreed those are three areas that are very important. Because we can make an argument that if they didn't take that $1 million surplus and allocate it to those 3 funds, with the volatility of special ed that I've talked about countless times at these meetings, not knowing the inflow versus the outflow, that could be a taxpayer's expense if they didn't put some of that $1 million into special ed. Capital, we've talked for years here about how, years ago when Sarah was here, I gave them this option, and the state statute followed, that there was that, what you cited earlier, about the surplus being allocated, given back to the Board of Ed. So they put approximately $300,000 into capital. That's a future taxpayer's expense that won't be needed now. And thirdly, on the insurance fund, they were concerned that with the claims history, that they would be short on the insurance fund, so they fortified that with Ed and I agreeing to it, of about $300,000 or $350,000, whatever that number is. we can make an argument that that $1 million that was allocated over those three funds protect the taxpayers in future budgets because they took a surplus and they applied it to three different categories that could be future taxpayer expenses.
And by capital, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mike, but by capital, do you mean this BOE Capital Improvement Special Fund? So shouldn't we see plus 300 in June revenue for that?
Probably, yes. So,
Because it looks
But-
like I see 448,000.
but that, I think that only answers half your question, though.
Yes.
So what was the other half? I was trying to understand the other half.
So, again, you've just accounted for 1 million.
Right.
Somehow we've gone from 2.6 million in surplus to 1.6 million to 7,000.
Yeah, Nance, I think.
So
I-
if you
I
subtract
do-
$1 million in there, the math doesn't
Wait,
work.
I do think I have the answer.
Okay, please.
Yeah. So the way this report is, I think you're misinterpreting it. At the last line, available budget, at the very end. Okay, those are the changes that you are questioning, is that right? When it went from 2.6 to 1.6
Yes.
and so forth. Yeah, that is not a predictor of what their budget will be at the end of the year. That's just saying what they have in unencumbered funds available to pay the bills for the last month or two. So that amount's going to go down all the time. Now, it doesn't logically correlate to what they spend in an average month because the Board of Ed, they change all their encumbrance numbers all the time. And so between those two lines, though, it's just telling you what they have left in after what they believe their bills are going to be, after their encumbrances, the ones they decided to list, not all of them. And just to show that they have some money to play with in the final 2 months. So that's why I went from 2.6 to 1.6 to the 470.
No, it just goes to $7,000. This is my point.
Yeah, well, they're going to go, it's the end of the year accounting. That's what we do. So at the end of the year, when they reconcile their accounts, they decide what to do with any remaining funds. And that's what was in their letter when they explained to us that they're putting 300,000 toward medical, 350 toward capital, and 350 toward a new reason that they've never done before.
Special ed, right.
Some new special ed
No.
fund that they've never had.
No, let me explain that, because you're right. We agreed to have them create a special ed fund to manage the volatility of special ed costs during a year. Because if we didn't have, if this pandemic didn't happen, the Board of Ed would have come back to the Board of Finance with a special allocation for special education to give them more money. So that is a very smart thing to do that Ed and I talked to them about. So I think when we look at this, I looked at that as $1 million surplus down to 7,000. With our approval, or our agreement, I should say, approval is too strong a word, our agreement with our guidance as to where to put that $1 million to protect and prevent future taxpayer expenses.
You realize it's not spent money, it's just an account title.
So, but there's still this issue of $473,000, which is not part of the
Yeah,
million.
but again, that was part of
Is
their
spent.
But yeah, it wasn't spent on one thing. What they ended up doing is, in reconciling their accounts, they spread it all out throughout their entire budget. Do you
No, no,
see
no.
all the changes?
I'm talking about this is the
Yeah,
special
but that's
funds.
but that's what they used that money for. Because
This
that's
is in 1 month, in the month of June.
Right, that's
They
the end
spent
of,
470.
what's at the end of June?
All right,
It's
so I
the
think
end of the year.
can we get an accounting of that, please, Ed?
All right.
So the
yeah.
473 is not spent. The 473, he was closing out the capital improvement, the carryover fund, and he asked me to move it to the health insurance fund. So if I give you a printout of that fund, you'll see a deposit there of 473,000 in the health insurance fund for the Board of Ed. So it's not spent, it's parked over in the health insurance insurance fund.
Ask them for a further accounting of it, and let's
That's
move
it.
on.
There's nothing else I could give you.
Okay.
But
So
Can we ask
we'll ask
them
for
to fix these reports?
ask for confirmation.
These reports
We
are
ask all the time.
Yeah, we ask all the time.
Right.
There's no column headings, you can't read them, it's like a puzzle, and I don't know if that's.
Tell them to use 11 by 17.
too many reports.
They condense everything on 8.5
Yeah,
by
I
11.
mean-
Well, I'll do what I can.
Well, if not, I mean, I'd be happy to give them feedback, because I keep bringing it up, it's ridiculous. It's hard to follow.
And so for the month of July, I see there is no BOE carryover line. So we're not
Correct.
gonna see that ever again.
Correct, that's what I'm saying. He closed it out, he said, hey, let's just, I need money in the self-insurance to health fund, let's move it there. And I said, that's fine, it works out for me. And we moved it there, so that fund is done. It's over.
But we voted on it a year ago to create.
Correct, you correct, oh, right, but we
He doesn't
spent
have to
all.
fund it.
It's all spent.
So even though there's $7,000, it's not worth even putting $7,000 just as a placeholder.
The 7,000 going to the capital.
No, that, the 7,000 that's left is gonna go into the general fund.
Yeah, it clears to the general
All right.
fund.
Yeah.
All right, I have one question on
Sure.
special funds.
What,
The-
not the general fund, the town.
Clears to the general fund.
They don't have to give us the $7,000 back, right?
What, here, right now it's $7,000. But
Right.
I'll tell you, in 3 or 5 months, once all these encumbrances clear, it'll be higher than that. Because they always, well, many times they close out for less than they've been encumbered.
But they don't have any obligation to give us back an excess, correct?
Correct.
They have-
They'll
So-
give us back at least this.
Right,
That's
but,
whatever's-
but legally may be the wrong word, but I'll use it for now. Any surplus they have, they don't have to give it back to the town, do they?
Well, they do, what's left in the budget, they do.
They do.
Anything that's.
Now that they've dissolved this BOE carryover
Anything-
fund, they have
Anything
to.
left in the budget clears to the general fund. We've given them the option, and when we created that capital account.
Yeah, to keep it, right,
shift money.
yeah, right.
Other than that, everything clears to the general
Okay.
fund.
So
Mike, you said you had something else on board?
Right, no,
or
Mr.
special
Frieda has
assessment?
something.
if we didn't give them that option,
It's been,
the $1 million would either have been spent on other line items, or it would have been given back to the town. And then we would have been potentially faced with a volatility on special ed, a capital request that would have been built into next year's budget, and a possible subsidization of the insurance fund if they ran short.
Yeah, no, I think that was smart,
totally
that's
agree.
smart usage of the
I
funds.
totally agree with
Good.
what they did.
Yeah,
So, but we, Ed and I were involved with that discussion, the $1 million allocated over the 3 different categories, because there are 3 very important categories for us.
Those 3 categories make total sense. It's something that was instituted years ago. Again, it's not spent money, it's just in a labeled account. It's appropriated.
Again, I didn't have any problem with that appropriation. I just had a problem with how did we go from
I think
2.6
that
million down to
Reading the report
7,000?
is apparently what the problem seems to be, and
And
we
this,
can ask them.
and this expenditure.
Again,
in
to
the month.
clarify
Again,
it. But
I
they
ask
also
every
do make
month.
it clear that we have no jurisdiction over them.
I know, but we can't tell them what to do, but they could certainly make reports that we could read and understand. I mean, this is, we talk about this every month.
They encumbered everything, every
Yeah.
first month.
Right.
Oh, their
How do you-
entire budget's encumbered in the first 2 months,
Yeah,
and
I know.
I know.
it's hard
It's
to
crazy.
track anything.
Yeah.
And then even if you do start to track it, they shift accounts around.
Yeah.
That's right. exactly.
So, but it's, again, it's how the state divided us. And we asked nice, Michael and I had met with them on a number of
Well,
occasions.
let me meet with them.
We might have to do that.
Let
Yeah.
Diane go.
Anything else on junior?
they don't like us, we're not allowed to.
Yes.
Any other?
No, the revenue, I'm sorry, yeah, on the special funds here. The police line went down 264, is that where the $200,000 sweep came from?
Yeah.
For our general, for our prior year budget as an account, as a revenue item? Okay. Are we also discussing the Board of Ed at the moment? We're doing Board of Ed right now?
June 30th.
Yeah. So as much as we might be dismayed by the many reports with no headings, you're right, nothing that we have. And in this case, we had a couple that were duplicated with different dates put at the top. So we have no idea what that's about. We did get a nice 2-page explanatory letter from Howard Wardlow, and I have to commend him and the Board of Ed on this communication, because it's, every ounce of it is worthwhile. And at the very end, it talks about the grants, and it says that they're in the process of applying for an ESSER 3 ARPA grant, for which the district has been allocated $2,041,000. So if the district was allocated, the North Haven district was allocated $2 million, why do they have to apply for it? Okay, well, we don't need to have the answer today.
Well-
But that was just,
North Haven is part of the district.
No, let me try to answer that, Mike.
I thought North Haven was its own district.
Yeah, so ARPA and ESSER are two different things. ARPA gets allocated, ESSER you have to apply for it.
Okay.
Was that your question?
Well,
Michael?
it's combined together in
Okay.
the writing
All
here. ESSER 3 ARPA grant.
I mean, we'll double check that.
Okay.
But the ARPA was allocated.
Okay.
ESSER is an application.
Are you good with Board of Ed then?
Since the medical fund balance for the Board of Ed is $1.6 million, is that both reserves and a running operating fund?
I didn't provide you with any information on that, so if you're looking at something Howard provided,
Yeah.
that's his number, and the only thing in that fund is just one cash account. I allocate it however you want, but the balance is the balance. That's it.
By the way,
Okay.
Mike, it looks like
And I
$2
don't
million
have
to
that
me.
information.
It's $1,968,000, right?
Yeah, another, right, because the other 300,000 went in there, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, he did provide this detailed printout regarding medical benefit funds and the reserve analysis and the forecast. And was this, who compiled this? Was this done by Brown and Brown, or is this made by the Board of Ed?
We got it from the Board of Ed, and that was the other put
You don't-
together.
It does have their title on it, so I don't know.
Yeah. Is there any way that periodically, maybe quarterly, we could get a report like that for the town's reserve funds? For the accounting
So like,
of the
I
medical?
put on that other sheet,
Well,
This isn't the reserve funds, this is the ins and outs of the actual account.
right, it is. I know, but I'm just looking at their heading here, even if their heading is not accurate. All right, well, I found it to be very interesting and worthwhile. So please consider having our insurance agent put together something similar to this in the future,
We'll consider it.
we'll consider it.
since
Anything else
we're
on-
paying them.
Anything else on June report?
I just had a quick question. If we're gonna be getting input from our auditors regarding how to apply the ARPA funds on the town side, will we also be getting input on how to apply it on the Board of Ed side? Because I don't see it listed here
Right.
under grants, so that's why I'm asking.
I believe it falls under their jurisdiction.
Yeah, it does. Look, we certainly could ask them, okay, so, but again, I want to reiterate, we have no jurisdiction over it. But if it's from an informational standpoint, we'll certainly ask them, okay?
Okay, that would be helpful.
Anything else on June reports? Can I have a motion to accept the June reports as presented?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second,
Does that
All in
include,
favor?
that includes the Board of Ed?
yes.
All June reports.
Aye.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? July reports. Obviously, this time of year, we are 1 month in. There is not a lot of information on those reports. Did anyone have any questions?
I'll move the reports.
Yeah,
Reports, is there a second? Or you have a question?
yes. Question.
What's your question?
Well, the question has to do with how we record the ARPA funds when they come in.
Did you know the answer to that yet?
Look, how we spend it and how it's applied is one thing. But we did include 1.17 in here under ARPA. So did we misforecast the 3 point, what did you say it was? 3 point how
So
much?
the 3,504,000.
Because I told you about the county money we were gonna get.
So it's the 3,504,000 is county and allocation, so it's the two. Originally, it was 1,244,000 roughly, so the county money came in. The county money came in at the end of June, after the first allocation of the original money.
I
So
did. I
we're-
said the
we're
check
gonna-
was in the mail.
We're gonna be talking about the aggregate number, which is what we talked about, 3,504,000.
Well, I try to stay positive, and I positively do not like that number at that inaccurate $2 million off to start.
Right, so,
That's,
well, we
we
didn't know.
could have done better.
Well, we would have just guessed what the county allocations would have been, so when we put it in once we got the final number.
Okay.
Anything else on July reports? Have a motion to accept July reports as presented?
Make a motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next item on our agenda, more informational, we can discuss what you like. In January, we set the schedule for Board of Finance meetings. They're always the third Wednesday of the month, but the suggestion and the place we appear to be moving is to move the time from 7 to 6 a.m. start.
6 a.m.?
6
No.
p.m. I could do a 6
That's
a.m.
early.
start, actually, I'm used to 6 a.m. start.
Can we do it by
It's a
Zoom?
6 p.m. Start. Kind of works for everyone's work schedule, I would still think. Most people are out by 5.
It's a little bit early, actually, and I think there is a proposal, and it hasn't been finalized, but at least a suggestion for a compromise position for the Board of Selectmen of 6:30. Is there any way we could also consider
Yeah,
that?
that would work for me too,
I think
because
that
I don't
would
get out of work. at
Much
5.
better for me.
I'm still working at 5.
Can I just ask the first selectman, Mike, was this a townwide initiative or suggestion?
We started at a Board of Selectmen meeting. We did compromise to 6:30, so it was put on here for this group to contemplate. My suggestion would be, we make it analogous with the Board of Selectmen at 6:30.
If it works for most people, when we do set January schedule, I would have, if proposed at 6:30, then.
We'll just tell Mr. Hallahan that it's at 6.
Can I, no,
Yeah,
can I
no,
still,
there you
can I
go.
still, can I
That's
still
the
arrive?
idea.
Can I still arrive at 7:01?
Yes, you may. We'll be all over.
Just don't discuss
I
anything.
will, I'm gonna call you and remind you.
Next item, budget transfers. We have a number of resolutions, you have the schedules. Before I read the resolutions, were there any questions? Hearing none, our first resolution, and again, this goes to a town meeting. Resolved that the Board of Finance approve adjustments in the appropriation of certain line items in the fiscal year 2021 budget, transfer amounts over $20,000 to the accounts as follows: budget transfers totaling $775,227.05. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
I make the motion.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Resolved that the Board of Finance approve adjustments in the appropriations within the same department in the fiscal year 2021 budget. Transfer amounts over $20,000 to accounts as follows: budget transfers in the amount of $694,379.31. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
Make a motion.
Second.
Second.
I just have one question.
Any discussion?
Some of these accounts seem to be related to the MRSA funded accounts. Did the MRSA money have any impact on how much we're moving around here in this situation?
No, the MRSA money's been taken out of it, this is what was left of the accounts.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends the following adjustments and appropriations of certain line items among the various departments in the 2021 budget. Transfer amounts over $20,000 as follows: budget transfers of $945,456.68. Can I have a resolution? Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
Make a Motion.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Well, it's just that the logic used by the finance department is always to try to work within the department first with adjustments and then between departments when necessary. Is that
Yes.
right?
Right.
Okay, that's all.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolved that the Board of Selectmen be requested to call a special town meeting to approve same as the agenda of the annual town meeting for appropriation of certain line items among the various departments in the 2021 budget amount over $20,000. Can a motion to move that resolution?
I'll do that.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that finishes,
Was there a date for them?
to the Board of Selectmen's prerogative as to when it is.
The date of the town meeting?
Yeah.
Looks like it's going to be September 20th. I think that's the date Valerie's working on that.
And last, public comment. We'll start left to right. Come up, say your name, you have to make your comment.
While she's coming up, can I ask Ed one question? Usually at the end of the year, we get some other end of the year reports that include an overview of the fund balances and so forth. Are we going to receive that in the future?
Well, as soon as I clear everything up.
Yeah, I know.
It's a lot, so
I understand.
I'll give you as much as I can once I get that
I
off.
feel your pain. I would never want your job. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Jenny Caldwell, 69 Kimberly Circle. Just a couple of quick things I wanted to address. The first is the Board of Ed budget and the layouts of the reports and things like that. At the town meeting, I went up to the new finance director and had commented on how difficult the reports were to read because I had heard this board talk about it multiple times over. He had never heard that before, so he was working on trying to make the font less. It was very light at that point. So my suggestion would be if there's a problem with the layout, he seemed very interested in making the reports easy to read, but I don't know that he always gets the information because I doubt he's watching these meetings and hearing.
Hopefully not.
So it seems like it needs to go, like, one person needs the responsibility to send that feedback to him because I think you'll get the report you want. So that's my defense of the Board of Ed. I think he'd be very willing to do that. In terms of the fire department budget, there was a lot of discussion on it. I have watched that over and over again. A couple of months ago, I sent an email to members of the Board of Finance. I did not have everyone's email address, so I just sent it to the people that I could. But the questions that came up around the overtime budget or the personnel budget that were over, I asked specifically the chief about it, and he did indicate that those the overages for that related to COVID and the illnesses and the overtime that was not only people who were out, but then the replacements and things like that. So that actual line, though, is going to be funded by some reimbursement from FEMA. It would be very helpful in the budgets to be able to see what line items are being reimbursed by FEMA or for some of the COVID relief, so you could have an actual comparison of, is the fire department budget actually over, or are those expenses being covered? The building expenses were also related to COVID. They have extra cleaning that has to happen to not one building like the police department, but 4 separate buildings. So that created obviously higher expenses, which are also being covered by FEMA. So I think that's important information to have, and it should show up in the budget. The other thing is, when I was watching when Zoom meetings were going on, the police department does have the ability on one line item, and I don't have the budget in front of me to be able to give the specific items, but when the fire department gets revenue from, some of the side jobs not side jobs, but the work that they do when they're, manning a traffic spot or things like that, there is a line item that has a minus amount on it that helps even out some of the revenue that's coming into the police department to their budget. The fire department also brings in revenue, but there is no way to actually show that in terms of their in terms of their budget. So I think that that would be very helpful information to have on the budget, to be able to show it some way, to let you know the actual, expenses that are paid for through the money that's brought in for the fire department.
Those items do show up in our special fund reports.
Right, but in the police department budget, and again, I don't have the budget in front of me, but I can send you the information, but when I was watching the meeting, I had the budget in front of me. There is a fire department line that actually has a negative line because it's money that is brought in, again, through some of the activities that they do that generate revenue. And the fire department does generate revenue in multiple ways, but it doesn't show up in their department's budget in the way it does in the police department. And I can't give you the specifics of it right now because I don't have the budget in front of me, but I would be happy to email it to you and let you know, because it seems like it would be a more accurate reflection of what's going on with the budget, in terms of sometimes you spend money in order to make money. And that kind of it's helpful to have that information if we're looking at a department to department budget versus an overall town budget. And then the last thing, this is more of a question, just because there's been a lot of talk about the different reimbursement for COVID-related expenses. Can someone give a brief understanding of the different pockets of money that are coming in and what the acronyms stand for? Because I know you guys have talked about ARPA or whatever, but then there's also FEMA money, and I know there was I'm assuming that the ARPA is the American Rescue, but then there's also FEMA, and then there was another bill that was passed that had a different name to it. So if someone can give sort of an explanation. CARES Act, yeah. And how that's going to be reflected in the budget, that would be very helpful. Is that a big question?
No, so,
I'm just trying to see if Mike wants to. Ray wants
so
to-
ARPA will be somewhere along the line included in the reports based upon what we said earlier, Jenny. So we're keeping it out until we get greater clarification.
And that's the 3.6.
3.5. FEMA, when the reimbursement comes in, and I'm just going to use the general numbers. Let's say it's $500,000. We will show it as a non-budgeted revenue item. And perhaps what we can do is we can illustrate it where it's allocated to, Public Works, Fire, wherever it may be.
Yeah, because we know what was submitted, if we get, everything submitted gets approved, and we get 75% of it, we could tell you which department it's applicable to.
But it's not
Gonna go against anybody's line. It's a separate revenue item.
Exactly. It's
Right.
not uncommon for that to come in
Right.
several months or a year afterwards.
Right.
Now, I know you're talking about, there's two items in the police. One of them has to do with animal control, because we were taking animals from Hamden. So they had to pay for supplies and everything, so that offset the line. You probably saw a negative there once in a while for maintenance and repair. And another one is also in the vehicles, because they used those for outside duty jobs, not the manpower, but the vehicle itself was billed. So that is above and beyond the normal wear and tear of the vehicle, so that revenue made sense to put it in there and offset the expense.
You could say the same thing about with the fire department when they're transporting to the hospital, they get a payment for that. That is extra wear and tear in the vehicle that would not happen. It seems like that should, if you're gonna do it for one department, it seems like it should happen for other departments as well. And I think it would also give you a more accurate information about the department's actual budget, in terms of some of the expenses are there in order to generate revenue. So it would when people look at the budget, they would understand that that's how that relates.
But in that case, I think transport is part of what they're gonna do on a regular basis. This was something the police were never gonna do, was never budgeted for, and that's why the revenue ended up against the expense.
Right, but they're not transporting on a regular basis to the hospital unless they get paid for it. So the expense of the vehicles relates to, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Just-
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Look at it.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sally Buemi, 5 Watson Drive. First, I'd like to address the entire board and say I'm very happy to be here and see all of you. And I hope that you all are getting through, because the pandemic is still going on. I hope that you all are getting through the many challenges of the pandemic and that your family and loved ones are doing well. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I would like to address a few issues that came up during the meeting. First and most recently, because Ms. Caldwell was talking about overtime and contractual replacement for the fire department. Years ago, you might recall, maybe 3 to 4 years ago, that there was just one line there. It was overtime, and it was always a big amount. And then it got divided into 2. Overtime, if you look on page 10 of the expenditure report, and I'm looking at the June 30th one, you'll see overtime and then contractual replacement staffing. So the old single overtime got split into 2, and I remember asking the chief of the fire department at a fire commission meeting, what is the difference and what is in contractual replacement staffing? And he said that that was for vacation, personal days, and sick days only. And there's also, per contractual obligation, some of the union representatives are allowed to take days off for negotiations, and when they get replaced, that falls in here. And overtime is for all other overtime matters. So I believe that certainly there was a need, because of the COVID situation that you had told us about, that there was a need for overtime to cover that staffing issue. You mentioned 11, so that included not just the 10 firefighters, but who else?
If I recall correctly,
Yeah.
what was told to us, and I could be
Yeah,
slightly mistaken, but an entire shift had to be
right,
quarantined.
okay,
Jenny's nodding up and
Yeah,
down.
okay.
Entire shift,
So
which means I think there's 11 on the shift, is there not?
10
10?
firefighters.
10 firefighters, wasn't 11.
Well, there's 10 firefighters
That's enough.
on 3 out of the 4 shifts, but this current budget, we phased in the final 2. They're probably not hired yet, but once they are hired and put on, there will be 10 firefighters on all 4 shifts, so yes. But I believe that came under overtime, so I am in agreement, and I do recall.
Jenny's saying no, and she's on the fire commission.
Okay, I think that, well, I'm going from the chief's description of contractual replacement staffing is vacation, personnel, and sick days only. I mean, this line continuously is over budgeted, and I think that is more related to the increase in the number of firefighters, and now we have 8 officers instead of 4. We used to have just 4 lieutenants and then firefighters. Now we have 8 captains, 4 lieutenants, and then a firefighter. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. Yeah,
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm watching Jenny saying no, and she's on the fire commission, she's a member of your own party. And
Right.
she's saying no, that's not what it was.
Well, the contractual, the replacement ones, the reason I believe that it was put there was because it related to people being sick. The
Okay.
amount that was over, I specifically went through the budget in a fire commission meeting, and you can, I'll find you the date and you can watch it, but it related to firefighters being out because of COVID. It wasn't because of the increase in the number of firefighters. It was,
Right.
and the reimbursement from FEMA was coming in to help cover that.
Thank you.
right. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is I am in agreement in theory what Ms. Barrett was saying, that as we increase our staffing, the contractual replacement staffing line is going to continue to go up, and I'm quite certain. I mean, it went up to 1,167,000. I don't know how long that staff had to be replaced, and what that overtime for those sickness came to. But if it was, this is 1,167,000. I agree that we're going to continue to see this line quite high. Hope, COVID notwithstanding is the point I'm trying to make. I wanted to talk about the slide that the first selectman had shown, explaining, in an effort to close out the current the fiscal year that just ended, the 2021 fiscal year that ended on June 30th. And I was very disappointed that in our packet that we got for this month's meeting, there was no letter that kind of looks like this. You've all seen them. It's got, it's always from the board, the finance director to the Board of Finance, and the selectmen get copies of it. It's had this same format of a formula to determine, I call it the report card, the fiscal year report card. And we didn't get one, and I have every one of these since I've been on the Board of Selectmen, and I know that this format existed even prior to the current finance director's tenure. It goes back quite a long time, and this year there wasn't one. So I took it upon myself to look at the year-end reports, revenue and expenditure for the 2021 fiscal year, and I looked at how this letter was formulated based on those reports. So, for example, I have the one from last year, the August 12th, 2020 letter, which was closing out the 1920 fiscal year. And I have the final reports from that closeout period. And when you determine the town, whether the town has a surplus or not, it says here, the surplus on the town side was derived from the expenditures, and in this case, they were under budgeted by an amount, just as there's an under budget of $753,000 for this year. And then it's offset by a revenue shortfall, and it has an amount, and it's a $923,000 amount, which is on the revenue report, which is always just 2 pages, the exact number that's in the lower right corner. There is no mention of subtracting MRSA, and we did get MRSA that year, 1.4 million, and it was shown on the revenue report as a 0, just as the 1.86 was shown as a 0 in your current year-end. I looked at every one of these report cards, if you will, that you get every year, and MRSA was never calculated in to determine that surplus. And so I have to question when Ms. Barrett asked the first selectman about the 2.9 million revenue shortfall that's in the lower right corner of page 2 of your year-end report. That is the number. That is the revenue shortfall. Last May of 2020, you guys, there was no referendum, you guys set a budget with a revenue amount and an expenditure amount. And that revenue amount came in 2.9 million short. You do not subtract MRSA. I feel like I'm in the twilight zone here. MRSA has never been subtracted for purposes of calculating whether we balanced the budget or had a surplus or a deficit. It has never come into play in this letter that we get every year, which surprisingly we did not get this year. So I agree that if you have a $2.9 million shortfall in revenue, which is what your revenue report says, and you have a $753,000 under expenditure on the town side and a $7,000 under expenditure on the Board of Ed, excuse me, the net deficit is $2,144,685. That's the under revenue of 2.9 minus the town underspent of 753,256 minus the BOE surplus of 7,355. I don't ever recall MRSA ever being subtracted from that calculation, and I have every one of them here. I have all of the, going back in time, all of the records of all of these summary letters that we got showing going back 1.7 million last year, 1.7 million, 1.8 million, 1.6 million, 640,000. Those were all calculated using this format that's been in existence for years, and there was never any subtraction of MRSA. I understand that we did get money from ARPA, but that was not budgeted for. We did budget for it in the current fiscal year, 21-22. As Mr. Hallahan correctly stated earlier, we budgeted $1,170,000 in ARPA, American Rescue Plan money, in our revenue budget this year. We did not budget any ARPA money because we didn't know it existed. It was only passed in March 11th of 2021. It was my understanding, though, that there were two tranches. One was in May. How much did we get in May?
About $1,245,000, I would say.
Okay, and then we budgeted to receive next year $1,170,000. And you said we got the first tranche in was the 2 million?
We got a total of $3.5 million this past fiscal year.
Okay, but we are expecting $1,170,000 to come in the second tranche for the town, ARPA, right?
So
No, another three.
another $3.5 million this fiscal year.
Okay, well, I was going by town only, I'm not the county. There's town money
Right.
and then there's county money.
Right.
And originally, we budgeted for the current fiscal year, correct me if I'm wrong, 21-22, we budgeted $1,170,000 because that's what we thought the town side only tranche was gonna be, that we were gonna receive in May
Yes.
of 2021, which of course is part of the last fiscal year.
Yeah.
But I do understand the memo that's in our packet that says we have to wait for guidance from the auditors for how to allocate it, but I don't really get how that would come into play in balancing or closing out the books for 2021, because we did not make any, we did not have any allocation, it did not exist in our revenue budget for 2021. We didn't know about it. Just as we don't calculate LOSIP or STEEP grants into that calculation of balancing the budget and what is the surplus, because it's not in our revenue budget. We leave those grants out. The Board of Ed leaves out its excess cost grant money because that's not in the revenue budget, and so it's not included in evaluating a surplus or not. It's left out, just as on the town side, STEEP and LOSIP is. So I do understand what you're saying, and I think that is certainly important, that a couple of $100,000 came in July for back taxes from the previous year. So that would help out with the very unusually high shortfall in revenue for current taxes. If you look at the current tax section, if you look at the tax section of your revenue report, there are 5 components. The first one, 1.1 million shortfall, was shocking to me because I looked at the past 4 or 5 years of that line in previous June 30th reports, and it was always a negative number, meaning we were bringing in more money. That's going to be quite a, it's hard to tell when we're going to get that back. But I don't understand why we can't call it as it is. According to our budget that we had in 2021 that ended on June 30th, in my opinion, there's a 2 million, where did I get it? Where did I put it? Thank you. Where'd that podium go? That's what I need. We need it's a $2,144,000 deficit. If you look at what we anticipated from revenue and what we underspent in our anticipated expenditure budget, that's how it nets out. So, Mr. Swakowski, why didn't we get this you know the letter that I'm referring
Absolutely.
to? Why didn't we get that letter,
You
sir?
didn't get the letter because the information available at June 30th isn't final. I don't know until I finish talking with Joe Sanafani how much of the ARPA money is going to end up in the general fund. So that part of the general fund is not closed. The revenue is not a final number yet. So if I give you a report as of June 30th, it's a guesstimate at this point.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that. I even told Mike, I can't do that because I don't have final numbers. Once he tells me how much I can apply to lost revenue, that money will be moved to the general fund in the revenue report, and then I can finalize a letter and send that out.
But
At
again-
this point, I don't have that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I understand that.
yeah.
But again, ARPA money was not in the 2021 revenue budget.
I know, and neither
Right.
was some FEMA money, but it still goes in the revenue report,
Well, we've gotten FEMA before, and I've
and it
never
goes in
seen
the
it.
revenue report.
It goes in the
Okay.
revenue.
Yeah,
Well,
there's no budget line for it,
let
but
me
it goes
ask
in
you,
there.
let me make
Can't
my
have
first
expense
point.
lines, but you can have revenue lines.
Let me ask you about my first point, which was when Ms. Barrett asked about the revenue shortfall being 2.9 million, and Mr. Frieda answered, you have to subtract the 1.8 MRSA money. Have you ever subtracted MRSA money from this format?
It's already out of it.
So you know you have not. When you tell us that there's a $1.7 million surplus, the MRSA money has nothing to do with that calculation. Even though, for example, this is from last year.
Right.
Last year you showed the 1.4 in MRSA exactly as you showed the 1.8 in this revenue budget as uncollected, a big zero.
Yeah.
And of course, then you have the negative numbers in the expenditure report for the areas, mostly streets and roads, that it applies to.
Right.
That's always how you've done it. But you have never, on this, what I call report card, fiscal year report card, when you announce in the first line of the second paragraph, year after year, the total surplus, and you give the numbers that are at the end of the revenue report and the expenditure report, I have never seen you subtract out MRSA from it. So that's why I have an issue with 1.8 being suddenly subtracted from the 2.9 million shortfall that is clearly reflected in the revenue report. So that's why I felt like I was a little in the twilight zone here, that it's so different from previous years. I just have a few other quick things. Oh, yes. The June 30th special funds report. Let's be very clear. I agree with Mr. Hallahan. This 2-page letter that we got from Howard Wardlow dated August 10th was a very great letter and very informative. But let's look at that in conjunction with the June 30th special funds, and specifically with regard to Ms. Barrett's question about the $473,000 in the BOE carryover line. Let's be clear, the Board of Ed in 2021 was allocated $57,324,245. $324,245, so $57.3 million. And if you look in the first paragraph in Mr. Wardlow's letter dated August 10th, you see that the total expenditures are $57,316. The difference between what we gave them and that number to the penny is that $7,355.08 that we've been talking about all night as the Board of Ed surplus. But that 57.3 expenditure has the million in it. That's from their budget. And from that million, we see that 350 went to special ed, 350 capital, and 300 medical. My first question is that medical category also the same as health insurance fund?
It's
I
a
hear-
reserve fund. It's a reserve fund for medical.
Is it,
Yes.
so when I hear health insurance fund and I see medical, is that the same?
Yes.
So there's not two, okay. Because when, so at the beginning of the year, the Board of Ed had this 57.3 million from us per the budget. They had 1 million left over that they divided up, 350, 350, 300. They also had at the beginning of the year, $557,718 that this board, last August, set up per 10-248A of the Connecticut General Statutes. You set up this fund for surpluses. And so they had this $557,718. And at the time of setting up that fund, Mr. Frieda stated that the purpose was to prevent a run to spend, spending Board of Ed money at the last minute, which when I was on the Board of Finance in the 80s, they did all the time. And I know in recent years, Mr. Frieda, rightfully so, and I commend him for it, entered into an agreement with the superintendent to pull that, stating that if there was any surplus, that it would go back to the Board of Ed for capital, and that you viewed this statute that was done last year as sort of the state catching up with what we had already done. And I agreed with that, and I commend you for that. But you kept stressing, we don't want this run to spend. Well, that's exactly what this is. And now, Mr. Ed, you gave 3 different answers to Ms. Barrett as to what this $473,632 was spent on. First, you said it wasn't spent. Then you said it was spent. And then you said it went to Then you said it went to capital, which is incorrect. The money that went to capital came from the million. And then you said it went, that the finance director at the Board of Ed was trying to close out that account, and it went to health insurance.
Right.
So am I to assume that that $473,632 was in addition to the $300,000 that went to medical? That's why I asked the question if health insurance fund is the same as medical, because you said health insurance fund and he wrote medical. So a total of $773,000 went to the same account. Is that true?
Same fund, yeah.
Okay. And so you said at the August 19th, 2020 meeting, Ed, when this resolution was adopted to form this account, it was called the BOE Unexpended Prior Year Funds Account.
Right.
You said it on that date at 1 hour, 34 minutes and 8 seconds, you said, I quote, "This fund is under our jurisdiction and our control, so nobody is going to spend any money out of the account without Department of Finance say so. They can make requests if they look legit, we will process." So that gave me the impression last year that you were under control of this fund.
Correct.
Based on your words.
But he has to send over his recommendation and request.
Okay, so he requested that the $473,632.
Go to the health insurance fund.
Okay.
And I had no problem with that, just moving
All
from one
right,
fund to
well,
another.
I swear, okay, but
Yeah.
then you changed your mind in the discussion and said it went to capital. But if you look at the special revenue, there's capital underneath on the bottom with an asterisk, and that asterisk came from the Board of Ed capital improvement line, which is completely different. So that's what was confusing me. You actually gave 4 different answers to Ms. Barrett's question, where did this 473 go? So it really has not been spent. It has been put in the medical,
Right, and I
AKA
think that's
health
what I said to
insurance.
begin with.
Which
It
is
was
what was said.
473 that went to medical.
No, at first he said it went to capital. I'm sorry.
At the conclusion of the statements, he was
Yeah.
clear as to where the dollars went.
Right, okay. I just wanted to make sure, because there was some, I wanted it clear that that was in addition to the 300,000 that came from the $1 million. So it's 2 different sources, right?
Right, the 473 came from this carryover.
Right, okay.
350 went from his budget into, let's see,
Capital and
Board
special
of Ed
ed.
capital improvement.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Plus whatever else he transferred, I'm sure.
And
there's
then
above.
medical was 300, so that 300 plus this 473 is now all in medical, also known as health insurance. Okay, well, that is very helpful because it was hard to follow, and I think during the discussion, there was some confusion of the three components of the $1 million and the 473, and medical and capital. So I just wanted to make that clear.
And
especially-
just to confuse things a little bit more, on the June 30th special fund statement, rather than having a June revenue for this BOE capital improvement of $350, which is the transfer we're all talking about, it actually has a June revenue of $448,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so where did the extra revenue come from?
I'd have to find out. I don't
So it's an
know.
extra $100,000.
Yeah, this stuff came in, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sally, just can you finish your comment?
Yeah, I'm just about ready to do that. Two more procedural comments, Mr. Chairman. I was very disappointed. In my opinion, the Board of Finance is the most important board in this town government, and I say that as a member of the Board of Selectmen. This is the board that decides how the people's money is going to be spent, and I was very disappointed that there were no arrangements or no even effort or thought to have live public comment from March of 2020 until this month's meeting. Also, Mr. Chairman, it is my hope that at future budget town meetings, the town attorney will be there to answer any legal questions. We only have two required town meetings per our charter, the annual town meeting and the budget town meeting in May. So I respectfully request that the town attorney be at both of those meetings. I had a legal question at the budget town meeting, and it could not be answered. So I just respectfully request in the future that a town attorney be present at those two required town meetings per charter. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Any other public
Yeah,
comment?
can I answer one thing Sally brought up? You were talking about the 448, and,
443.
well, also the money went into the,
Capital improvements?
yeah,
Yeah.
the 448. If you look down below, I have my footnote here. The total for the year was 504,246, and it's broken down here. They transferred 350 from their budget, and there were two different payments of ESSER funds that went in here because he had spent the money out of there, and I told him he could put it back there because it was a wash anyway. Okay, so that's where the 504 ties up, 350 and the 154 at the footnote at the bottom.
So why, how is it 448, not 504?
448 is the June only.
That's just June, right.
Year-to-date.
Right. ESSER fund probably came in two payments.
Okay, so
Oh, I
the
see.
extra
That's
money
year-to-date.
above and beyond the 350
Is
is
ESSER.
ESSER. Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
That answers that.
Any
Thank
other
you very
public
much.
comment? Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
Is there any chance we could get our packets?
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.